This is the McKinsey podcast, where we help you make sense out of our world's toughest business challenges.
Welcome to the show. I'm Lucia Rahili.
And I'm Roberta Fasaro.
The value of the human in the loop is not going to go away. So the challenge for leaders is they need to understand how this technology is impacting themselves, their teams, their business, so that the institutions that they're leading can use technology in service of society, in service of their customers, in service of employees.
That's McKinsey senior partner Ramesh Srinivasan talking about the role of technology and humanity in today's organizations. He joins me and senior partner Hans-Werner Kaas to discuss their new book on the inside-out journey of leadership. The book explains why leaders need to understand themselves first before they can lead others most effectively. Hans-Werner, Ramesh, welcome to the podcast.
It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you, Roberta. Pleasure to be with you today.
So you and your co-authors just released a new book, The Journey of Leadership, How CEOs Can Learn to Lead from the Inside Out. Put simply, to start us off, what is inside-out leadership?
Roberta, the world is changing rapidly. The geopolitics have become quite complex. Technology is having a huge impact, and climate change is here to stay. In this context, we felt the world needs a new paradigm of leadership. We call it human-centric leadership. And our belief is that leaders need to really reflect on their purpose, who they are, how they show up in the world, and how they can inspire their teams and inspire the institutions they're leading.
Hans-Werner, anything to add there?
We think that human-centric leadership provides a permanent guidepost for leaders of all backgrounds and levels. And having such a guidepost to which colleagues, external stakeholders can really look up to, displayed in your own behavior as a leader, is central. The inside-out notion, Roberta, which you raised, means that any change, you may argue not surprisingly, starts with ourselves, need to have the ability to be self-aware of our words, of our behaviors and actions, and then reflect, use self-reflection, where our strength is, but also where our weaknesses are. You may call it development needs. And that requires to especially adopt human behaviors from empathy and care, compassion, humility, vulnerability, but at times also determination, confidence, resilience, and balancing these different behavioral sets really depends on the situation you're in as a leader.
I had a question about the why this, why now. And Ramesh, you answered it a little bit. The challenges for today's leaders here in 2024 are very different. But can you talk a little bit about what exactly has changed?
Like I briefly mentioned, Roberta, the geopolitics in the world have become much more complicated today. I talked about technology, AI, Gen AI is also having a huge impact. And so amidst all these changes, leaders need to have a sense of who they are, what is their purpose, what motivates them, how do they show up in the world, what do they talk about, how do they understand their own team members even more deeply as human beings, so that they can inspire their team members in the spirit of their own purpose, and use all of that to inspire organizations and institutions that they're part of.
Hans-Werner, you'd mentioned a few seconds ago that this inside-out approach, it's very personal, right? That the book prompts leaders to tap into some very personal areas, to take a closer look at their vulnerabilities, perhaps their insecurities. And that can be scary, right? So I'm curious, how can the book help ease this process for CEOs and other leaders?
There are actually stories of 24 former CEOs/active CEOs in the book. They are very personal. They are not just, we would call it, descriptions by the textbook. They reveal themselves much more about their insecurities, their struggles, but also how they have addressed them and how they have tried to overcome them. Nobody of those 24 CEOs, former CEOs, would say that they have achieved or reached their destination point. But I think all of them would say they are on a real good trajectory to become more effective, more human-centric leaders. The second suggestion or consideration I would offer, we do have a step-by-step, call it Reinvention guide in the book that really helps with that approach to really transform and reinvent yourself.
I want to dive into some of the chapters. The book is very helpfully divided into two parts, the psychological and emotional aspects of leading yourself, and then the human side of leading others. Among the kind of leading yourself or managing yourself chapters, which talk about things like humility, confidence, selflessness, vulnerability, resilience, and versatility, Ramesh, is there any one of those traits or a focus area that is more important or, say, harder to get right than the others?
Frankly, we find all of them are quite important. The one that I wanted to start with is this balance between courage and curiosity. And I'll share the example of Stefan Bansal, and he shares this in the book, where at the peak of the crisis and the pandemic, Stefan had to make a choice on setting a bold aspiration to develop and manufacture a vaccine, something that Moderna had never done before. So he had the courage to set a bold vision and inspire his team. At the same time, he brought an incredible level of curiosity because he knew there were many things that they did not have capabilities for. An example being how to manufacture a vaccine and how to manufacture 1 billion doses of a vaccine. And so that balance between courage and curiosity is one attribute I want to highlight. The other is the balance between confidence and humility. Lynn Elsenhans, another inspiring leader and CEO, she brings out this balance between confidence and humility. On the one hand, she sometimes had to be in rooms where she was the only woman and had to really bring a sense that she belonged here. And herself as a leader, she brings amazing confidence. I've seen that in all my interactions with her, and yet is extremely grounded and humble in the way she operates, in the way she inspires her team.
There's one more example which comes to my mind, and that is with the former CEO of Ford Motor Company, Mark Fields. When he became CEO of Mazda Corporation, which was part of the Ford Group of Enterprises in the year 2000, he was self-reflecting and said it might indeed be much better for the first 6 months or so to show humility. So he went on a very deep, call it, mission of listening and humility and not pretending that he had all the answers, even though he did have clear views and hypotheses on the answers and solutions for the company. But he engaged in that balance of showing confidence, but also humility and also vulnerability, because he did also clearly express that not all the answers are obvious to him, and it will take co-creative team effort to develop them. One additional example I would offer is what we call deep learning or fearless learning. Admiral Eric Olson, former head of U.S. Special Operations Command and by himself an educated Navy SEAL, he talks about the notion of fearless learning. And he always says it is such an important ability to not fear that your assumptions were wrong. On the contrary, to actually be willing to change your assumptions if needed, to abandon your assumptions. And he always says that not a single plan survives the first enemy contact. And in that context, he always talks about how important it is when the terrain differs from the map. You have to follow the terrain, which means make a new plan, change the assumptions so that you have a higher probability of succeeding in your mission.
Hans-Werner, you mentioned a couple of things here that I wanted to pick at. This notion of self-awareness is critical, right? To being able to make this or to succeed with this inside-out journey. But CEOs and leaders, military leaders, they have such a packed agenda, right? There's always so much going on. How do leaders find the time to break from the day-to-day patterns and actually practice some self-awareness and take the time to reflect? Or how hard or how easy is it, I guess, for them to do that?
So first, it is hard, Roberta. It is very hard, not only hard, and I think we all experience that in our own roles and professional journeys within McKinsey, but also outside of McKinsey. And I would point to what we describe in the book as micro practices. And as it relates to making time to be self-aware, I mean, obviously, all of us, we have to, first of all, understand our situation very well, why it is so hard for us to do it. But there are practical things you can do. You might indeed say, when you wake up in the morning, the first hour, you're not touching any digital companion or digital device, but use the time to mentally go through your day and say, where do I put the hour, or have I put it already, that hour on my calendar, where I'm indeed, if you wish, not at all interacting with anybody else. You're just alone with your thoughts. And reflect on what you have done in the recent past, the last day, the recent week. What were the impact of your words and behaviors on others? And that is very important, because self-aware means you have to understand the implications of your words and thoughts on others. That is a very fundamental leadership. The second step then is self-reflect, which gets in the exercise of developing behavioral practices to improve. So that's that sequence.
In the book, one of the ideas, a media company ex-CEO talks about the notion of finding truth tellers in the organization. As you get senior, people often don't come and tell you the truth or give you specific suggestions for how you can evolve as a leader. So putting in place a culture where people feel safe and taking the time to go meet people, the level below, people at the front line who are meeting with your customers, is actually critical to have a pulse of what is happening. And that can also be a great source for insight and subsequent self-reflection.
Ramesh, you'd mentioned Gen AI as one of the bigger changes, that artificial intelligence is one of the bigger changes that leaders are facing nowadays, and sort of pointing to the importance of human-centered leadership. Can you, both of you, say a little bit more about this notion of leading alongside Gen AI and other technologies?
Yeah, I see technology having a massive impact on the world. Yet, in all our research and our work, we feel the value of the human in the loop is not going to go away. So the challenge for leaders is they need to understand how this technology is impacting themselves, their teams, their business, and how the role of the leader and the human being is actually evolving. Hans Werner talked about the value of empathy, deep listening, creativity. Those dimensions we don't see going away. So the question for leaders is, how do they hone in on some of these skills, and how do they bring that to bear so that the institutions that they're leading can use technology in service of society, in service of their customers, in service of employees?
Two things it will, in our view, not accomplish. It cannot develop the emotional human touch. And I think that the second point is, in terms of Gen AI, it actually can be a helpful tool to all different leaders or also managers, but they need to understand where those most profound simply applications are, and be very cognizant of it, and not hype it or exaggerate that it is the solution to many of the leadership problems. It is not.
Hans Werner, another change that we cover in the book is this notion of the Imperial CEO. Folks like Jack Welch and Lee Iacocca, the larger-than-life leader, is essentially no more. When did that change, and why did it change?
On the one hand, the forces at work, whether it's in geopolitics, in societal movements, but also environmental sustainability and technological spheres, have dramatically changed compared where we were in the years of the 80s, 90s. We think that that age of the Imperial CEO has long passed. And all that comes back to what we said, inside-out leadership and displaying human-centric leadership. Only then you will invite stakeholders and colleagues to provide ideas in a proactive manner and really be engaged. versus being, quote unquote, used in a more command and control type of environment as if they would be managerial subjects.
If you're looking out a year, 2 years ahead, what impact do you hope this book will have in the business community?
Our hope is both business leaders, but also social impact leaders benefit from the ideas in the book. And of course, leaders of all genders, of all kinds, that we hope will benefit from what we have in the book. So that's really our first hope. We also want to add to the debate on leadership, to leadership as a knowledge and research topic in the world. We are hoping that this would be an additional contribution that we are making in the world. And then, of course, our hope is to use the book as a catalyst to engage with leaders and institutions on this topic, to help them at an individual level, help their teams, and help institutions in the world.
Yeah, let me pick up on the third comment. The aspiration is indeed everybody who reads the book, or even only a portion of the book, that he or she becomes more human-centric, not only in personal life, but certainly also in professional life in the different sectors. I think the second point is the process itself. We describe in the book the sequence of the chapters, but also in the Journey Never Ends chapter, the conclusion chapter. Every reader should indeed define for him or herself their own self-reflection and reinvention process and methodology. And that can happen with confidence within your family circle, your spouse. It could be with one or two trusted individuals on your executive team or trusted individuals in your broader organization. It can happen with external coaches, but find your own, what we would call self-reflection and self-reinvention forum.
The book is called The Journey of Leadership, How CEOs Can Learn to Lead from the Inside Out. Ramesh Hans-Warner, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for listening to the McKinsey podcast. I'm Lucia Rahili.
And I'm Roberta Fasaro.
Find us on McKinsey.com. We'll have a transcript of this episode up shortly.
And download the McKinsey Insights app, where you can find this podcast and other helpful content updated daily.
If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to leave a rating and a review.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.